Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, trying to find something to fill the quiet evening, when the front door swung open and my whole world flipped upside down. Camilla, my wife of nearly 2 decades, walked in like she owned the place, which, to be fair, she always did. But this time, she wasn't alone. There was a guy with her, some slick-haired jerk with a smirk that made my stomach twist. He had this air about him, like he'd already won something I didn't even know we were competing for. And then there was this little girl, maybe 5 years old, clinging to Camilla's hand, her big eyes darting around the room like she wasn't sure where she'd landed. I froze, my thumb still hovering over the remote, the TV buzzing faintly in the background. Camilla didn't even look at me at first. She just marched in, dropped her purse on the counter, and turned to me with this cold, hard stare I'd never seen before. "Sign these divorce papers and leave now," she said, her voice flat, like she was telling me to take out the trash. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a fight. It was an order, like I was some hired help she was done with. I blinked, trying to process it, my heart thumping in my chest like it was trying to break free and run. Divorce papers? Leave now? What the hell was happening? Next to me, Julian, my 16-year-old son, sat stiff as a board on the couch. He'd been scrolling on his phone, probably texting his friends or watching some dumb video, but now his screen was dark, his hands gripping the thing like it was a lifeline. His jaw was tight, and I could see the fire flickering in his eyes, even though he didn't say a word. He's always been like that, quiet when he's mad, but you can feel it rolling off him in waves. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence, but my tongue felt heavy, stuck to the roof of my mouth. Camilla didn't wait for me to catch up. She reached into her bag, pulled out a stack of papers, and slapped them down on the coffee table in front of me. The sound echoed in the room, sharp and final. "This is done," she said, crossing her arms. "We're done." The guy Trent, she called him later, shifted behind her, looking smug, like he was enjoying the show. The little girl, Ava, just stood there, her tiny fingers wrapped around Camilla's, staring at me like I was some stranger she'd never seen before. Maybe I was. I looked at the papers, the black ink blurring a little as my eyes tried to focus. Divorce. She wasn't kidding. After 18 years, 2 houses, 1 kid, and a million little fights I thought we'd survived, she was standing there telling me to pack up and get out. My house. Our house. The one I'd painted, fixed, lived in for years while she was off finding herself on her endless work trips. I felt my hands clench into fists, the remote digging into my palm. "Camilla," I finally managed, my voice rough, like I hadn't used it in days. "What is this? Who are these people?" She rolled her eyes, like I was the idiot for asking. "This is my life now," she said, gesturing to Trent and Ava like they were some prize she'd won. "You've been sitting here, doing nothing, while I've been building something real. Sign the papers, take your stuff, and go." Her words hit me like a punch, each one sinking deeper into my gut. Nothing? I'd raised Julian. I'd kept this house running. I'd waited for her, night after night, while she drifted further away. And now she was rewriting the story, making me the loser who didn't matter. I glanced at Julian again, hoping he'd say something, anything, to back me up. He didn't. He just stared at his mom, his eyes narrowing, like he was sizing her up. I could tell he was hurt. Hell, I was hurt. But he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing it. Neither was I. Not yet. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, trying to keep my breathing steady. "You can't just walk in here and kick me out," I said, keeping my voice low, controlled. "This is my home too." Camilla laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "Your home? You've got no job, no money, no nothing. You're lucky I didn't do this sooner." She thought she had me pinned, helpless, ready to slink away with my tail between my legs. Trent smirked again, and I wanted to wipe that look off his face with my fist. But I didn't move. I just sat there, letting her words bounce around in my head, trying to figure out how the woman I'd loved for half my life had turned into this stranger standing in front of me. The little girl tugged on Camilla's hand, whispering something I couldn't hear. Camilla bent down, murmured something back, and then straightened up, brushing her off like an annoyance. That's when I really looked at Ava, her dark hair, her round face. She didn't look like Julian. She didn't look like me. But she had Camilla's nose, maybe her chin. My stomach dropped. How long had this been going on? How long had my wife been living a double life while I was here, playing dad, playing husband, thinking we were still a family. I felt sick, the room spinning a little as the pieces started clicking together. Trent wasn't just some new guy. Ava wasn't just some kid she'd picked up somewhere. This was planned. This was her escape hatch, and I was the dead weight she was cutting loose. "Dad," Julian said suddenly, his voice cutting through the fog in my head. I turned to him, and he nodded at me, just once, like he was telling me to hold on. He didn't look at his mom, didn't even acknowledge Trent or the girl. He just kept his eyes on me, steady and sure. It was enough to pull me back, to keep me from falling apart right there in front of them. I took a deep breath, letting it out slow, and looked back at Camilla. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said, my voice stronger now. "You don't get to waltz in here and blow everything up without a fight." Her eyes flashed, annoyed, like she hadn't expected me to push back. Trent shifted, his smirk fading a little. And Julian? He just sat there, silent, waiting. Whatever was coming next, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat there on the couch, staring at Camilla as she stood across from me, her arms crossed and her eyes gleaming with something I could only describe as victory. She thought she had me cornered, like a rat in a trap, and she was savoring every second of it. The divorce papers still sat on the coffee table between us, untouched, mocking me with their crisp white edges. Trent, her new boyfriend, leaned against the kitchen counter like he already owned the place, his slick hair catching the light, his smug grin making my skin crawl. And Ava, that little 5-year-old girl, stood by Camilla's side, her tiny hand still gripping my wife's fingers, looking lost in the middle of this mess. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a rope around it and kept pulling, but I couldn't let it show. Not with Julian sitting next to me, his silence louder than any words he could have said. Camilla thought I had nothing, no job, no power, no fight left in me. She was wrong, but I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. For years, I'd been the one holding things together. When Camilla decided her career was more important than us, I didn't argue. I stayed home, raised Julian, made sure he had food on the table, a clean shirt for school, someone to talk to when the world got heavy. She'd always been ambitious, traveling for weeks at a time, chasing promotions, telling me it was all for our future. I believed her back then. I'd cook dinner, keep the house running, and wait for her calls that came less and less often. She'd breeze in for a weekend, all smiles and expensive perfume, then vanish again. I didn't chase her. Maybe I should have. Maybe that's why she thought she could walk in here now, with this Trent guy and a kid I'd never seen before, and just erase me like I was some smudge on her perfect life. "You've been a ghost in this marriage for years," she said, her voice sharp, cutting. "I've moved on. You should too. Moved on." Like it was that simple. I looked at Trent again, trying to figure out who this guy was. He wasn't some random fling. He carried himself like he'd been around a while, like he knew things about my wife I didn't. His suit was pressed, his shoes polished, the kind of guy who spent more time in front of a mirror than I'd spent fixing the leaky sink last month. And Ava, she wasn't mine. That much was clear. Her dark eyes flicked between me and Camilla, unsure, like she was waiting for someone to tell her what to do. I did the math in my head. 5 years old. Camilla's trips had gotten longer around then, her excuses flimsier. I chalked it up to work stress, to her needing space. Now I saw it for what it was, a lie. She'd been building a whole other life while I was here, playing the fool, thinking we were still a team. "You expect me to just walk away?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were shaking a little. I shoved them into my lap so she wouldn't see. "After everything I've done for this family?" Camilla laughed, a cold, brittle sound that bounced off the walls. "Family? You mean sitting around, pretending to be a writer while I paid the bills? I've been carrying us, and I'm tired of it." That stung. I'd given up my job years ago. Yeah, but it was for Julian. For her. She'd begged me to stay home so she could climb the ladder, and I did it because I loved her. Now she was twisting it, making it sound like I was some lazy bum leeching off her success. I wanted to yell, to tell her how many nights I'd stayed up with Julian when he was sick, how many times I'd fixed this house with my own hands, how I'd kept us afloat when her career didn't cover the mortgage. But I didn't. Not yet. Julian shifted beside me, his knee brushing mine. I could feel the tension in him, like a coiled spring ready to snap. He hadn't said a word since she walked in, but his eyes were locked on her, watching every move. He knew more than he was letting on, I could sense it. He'd always been sharp, picking up on things I missed. Maybe he'd seen this coming. Maybe he'd heard her on the phone, caught whispers of Trent or Ava when I was too busy to notice. I wanted to ask him, to lean over and whisper, "What do you know, kid?" But this wasn't the moment. Camilla was still talking, laying out her victory speech like she'd rehearsed it in the car. "Trent and I have something real," she said, glancing at him with a smile I hadn't seen in years. "Ava's part of that. You're not." Her words landed heavy, each one a brick piling up between us. I looked at the little girl again, her small face framed by dark curls. She didn't deserve this, being dragged into a fight she couldn't understand. But Camilla didn't care. She was too busy rewriting our history, painting me as the failure so she could feel good about walking away. I leaned back on the couch, forcing myself to breathe, to think. She thought I was weak because I didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't beg her to stay. She didn't know me at all. "You're making a mistake," I said quietly, meeting her eyes. She smirked, like she'd already won. "No, you're the one who's been living a mistake. Sign the papers, and let's end this." I didn't touch the papers. I just sat there, letting her words hang in the air, feeling the weight of Trent's stare and Ava's confusion. Julian's silence was a wall beside me, solid and strong. Camilla thought she'd blindsided me, that I'd crumble under her big reveal. But I'd spent years learning to be patient, to wait, to watch. She didn't know I'd been keeping score, not with anger, but with facts. The house, the money, the truth. She thought she was serving me betrayal on a silver platter, cold and final. She didn't realize I wasn't ready to eat it. Not yet. I glanced at Julian again, and he gave me the smallest nod, like he was saying, "We've got this." Maybe we did. Maybe this wasn't the end she thought it was. I watched Camilla as she stood there, her posture stiff and confident, like she'd spent months plotting this moment in her head. She had it all figured out, didn't she? The divorce papers still sat on the coffee table, glaring at me, daring me to pick them up and sign my life away. She'd walked in here with Trent and Ava like they were her shiny new trophies, and I was just the old, broken thing she was tossing out. "We've been apart for years," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. "We're practically strangers. It's time you moved on." She didn't even look at Julian, didn't acknowledge the boy sitting next to me who'd spent his whole life waiting for her to come home. It was like he didn't exist in her new little world. I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees, trying to keep my hands from shaking. She was so sure of herself, so certain she'd planned every step of this perfectly. And maybe she had, up until now. She kept talking, laying it out like she was reading from a script. "This house isn't yours anymore," she said, waving a hand around like she was already redecorating it in her mind. "I've got a family now, Trent, Ava, me. You don't fit here." Her words were sharp, meant to cut, and they did. I felt them slice through me, stirring up a mix of anger and hurt I didn't want to show. She thought I'd just nod, grab a bag, and slink out the door, leaving her to play house with this guy who looked like he spent more on hair gel than I did on groceries. Trent stood there, arms crossed, nodding along like he was part of the plan too. Ava stayed quiet, her big eyes flicking between us, probably wondering why the grown-ups were so mad. I wanted to ask Camilla how long she'd been cooking this up, how many nights she'd lied to me about work trips while she was off starting a new life. But I didn't. I just listened, letting her spill it all out. She thought she knew me, thought I was some washed-up guy with no backbone, no fight. For years, I'd let her take the lead because I loved her, because I wanted her to be happy. When she said she needed to travel for her job, I stayed home with Julian. When she said she needed space, I gave it to her. I didn't push, didn't pry, didn't demand answers when she came back smelling like someone else's cologne. I trusted her. And now she was using that trust against me, spinning it like I'd been the one drifting away. "You've had your chance," she said, her tone final. "I'm done pretending this works." Pretending. That word stuck in my throat, bitter and hard to swallow. I'd spent years building a life with her, raising our son, keeping this house warm for her to come back to. And she'd been pretending? I glanced at Ava again, that little girl who didn't ask for any of this. She was proof Camilla hadn't just moved on, she'd built something else entirely. 5 years old. That meant this wasn't some fling that started last month. This was years in the making, years of lies piling up while I was here, fixing Julian's lunches and patching holes in the drywall. I felt my jaw tighten, my teeth grinding together as I tried to keep my cool. Camilla didn't notice. She was too busy laying out her perfect plan. "I'll take the house," she said. "You can find somewhere else. It's only fair." Fair. She had the nerve to talk about fair when she'd been cheating, lying, and planning this ambush behind my back. I wanted to laugh, but it caught in my chest, turning into something heavy instead. Julian shifted next to me, his sneakers scuffing the floor. He still hadn't said anything, but I could feel him listening. taking it all in. He was smarter than me sometimes, quicker to see through people. I wondered what he was thinking, if he'd caught on to his mom's game before I did. I wanted to reach over, put a hand on his shoulder, tell him we'd be okay. But I didn't move. I kept my eyes on Camilla, watching her play her part. She thought the house was hers because her dad had bought it years ago, back when we were first married. She figured it was still in his name, or hers by default now that he was gone. She didn't know what I knew. She hadn't bothered to check the details, too busy with her big exit strategy to dig into the paperwork. That was her mistake. You really think it's that easy? I said, my voice low, cutting through her monologue. She stopped, her head tilting slightly, like she wasn't used to me talking back. What? She snapped, annoyed. You think you've got some claim here? You've got nothing, no leverage. She was so sure, so cocky. Trent smirked again, like he was in on the joke. I let the silence stretch out for a second, just long enough to make her shift uncomfortably. The house, I said, leaning back on the couch, crossing my arms. It's not yours to take. Her eyes narrowed, confusion flickering across her face. What are you talking about? Dad left it to me. She was so certain, clinging to that old story she'd told herself. I shook my head, slow and deliberate. No, Camilla. He didn't. She froze, her mouth opening like she wanted to argue, but didn't know where to start. For the first time since she walked in, that smug look of hers faltered. She didn't know about the deed, about the quiet meeting I'd had with her dad years ago when he saw how she was treating us. He'd signed it over to me, not her, because he trusted me with Julian, with the home he built. It was all legal, locked away in a file she'd never bothered to look at. I didn't say all that yet. I just let her stew in it, let her wonder what else she'd missed. Trent glanced at her, his smirk fading, like he wasn't so sure about her plan anymore. Ava tugged on Camilla's hand, whispering something, but Camilla shushed her, too rattled to focus. Julian stayed quiet, but I caught the faintest hint of a smile on his face, like he knew I'd just flipped the board. She thought this was all according to her plan. She was wrong, and I wasn't done yet. I sat there, watching Camilla's face twist as my words sank in. The house isn't yours to take, I'd said, and now she was staring at me like I'd just spoken a different language. Her confidence, that rock-solid certainty she'd walked in with, was cracking right in front of me. She'd assumed she had everything locked down, Trent by her side, Ava as her new little prop, and this house as her prize. She thought she could shove those divorce papers in my face, and I'd just roll over, tail between my legs, and let her have it all. But I wasn't the pushover she'd painted me as, and this house, the one I'd poured years into, wasn't hers to claim. Not anymore. I leaned back on the couch, crossing my arms, letting her stew in the silence. Julian sat next to me, still as a statue, but I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for what came next. Camilla shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. That's impossible, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Dad would never, she trailed off, like she couldn't even finish the thought. She was so sure her father had left this place to her, some unspoken inheritance she'd always counted on. She'd grown up here. After all, her childhood was carved into the scratches on the doorframes, the faded marks on the walls. When we got married, her dad handed us the keys, a wedding gift wrapped in a big red bell. She figured that meant it was hers forever. But she didn't know the whole story, didn't know what happened after she started drifting away from us. I did. I'd kept it quiet, tucked away, because I never thought I'd need to use it. Until now. Years ago, her dad, Tom, started seeing through her. He was a gruff old guy, not big on words, but he loved Julian more than anything. He'd come over sometimes, sit on the porch with me while Julian played in the yard, and we'd talk. Not about much, just the weather, the kid, how the house was holding up. But one day, after Camilla had been gone for weeks on another business trip, he looked at me, his eyes tired, and said, "She's not the girl I raised." I didn't argue. I just nodded, because I'd been feeling it too. She'd stopped calling him, stopped checking in, too busy with her big life to care about the old man who'd given her everything. He saw how I stuck around, how I kept things steady for Julian while she chased whatever it was she was after. And he didn't like it, not one bit. So one afternoon, he showed up with a stack of papers and a notary. "This house is yours," he said, his voice rough but firm. "Not hers. You're the one who's earned it." I tried to argue, told him it wasn't right, that Camilla would lose her mind if she ever found out. But he wouldn't hear it. "She's made her choices," he said. "I'm making mine." He signed the deed over to me, just like that, all legal and binding. It was filed away, locked in a drawer I hadn't touched since he passed 2 years ago. I never told Camilla. Why would I? She was barely around, and when she was, she didn't care about the house, only about what it looked like to her fancy friends. She assumed it was still hers because she never bothered to check. That was her mistake, and now it was mine to play. What do you mean? It's not mine, she said now, her voice rising, panic creeping in. She stepped forward, her hands balling into fists. This was Dad's house. He gave it to us, to me. I shook my head again, slow and steady, keeping my eyes on hers. He gave it to me, Camilla. Years ago. After he saw how you treated him. How you treated Julian. Her mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. She didn't want to believe it, couldn't wrap her head around the idea that her own father had picked me over her. Trent shifted behind her, his smug look gone, replaced by something uneasy. He didn't know this part of the plan either. I could tell. Good. Let him sweat too. You're lying, she said, but it sounded weak, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. He wouldn't do that. He loved me. I shrugged, keeping my voice calm. He did. But he loved Julian more. And he trusted me to take care of him. You weren't here, Camilla. I was. That hit her hard. I saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her eyes flicked away for a second. She hated being reminded of what she'd missed, all those years she'd left us behind. She built this story in her head where she was the hero, the hard-working mom who'd sacrificed everything. But the truth was she'd sacrificed us, me, Julian, her dad, for whatever she had with Trent and Ava. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to a photo I'd kept, a scanned copy of the deed, just in case. I held it up, letting her see the date, the signatures, the notary stamp. It's all here, I said. Legal and done. You can check the county records if you want. Her face went pale, the color draining out like someone had pulled a plug. She grabbed the phone from my hand, her fingers trembling as she zoomed in, reading every word. Trent leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing. This can't be right, he muttered, but he didn't sound so sure anymore. Ava stayed quiet, clutching Camilla's leg, her little face confused. I almost felt bad for her, almost. Camilla shoved the phone back at me, her eyes blazing. This doesn't change anything, she said, but her voice shook. I'll fight this. You can't keep me out. I smiled, just a little, because for the first time since she walked in, I felt the ground steady under me. You can try, I said. But it's my name on the deed, not yours. She glared at me, her perfect plan crumbling, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to find a way to claw back control. Julian finally moved beside me, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. He didn't say anything, but his presence was enough. We were in this together, and she didn't see that coming. Her plan was falling apart, and I wasn't going anywhere. I sat there, the phone still in my hand from showing Camilla the deed, watching her scramble to hold on to whatever was left of her plan. She'd come in here so sure of herself, thinking she could bulldoze me out of my own life with a stack of papers and a smug boyfriend. Now she was rattled, her eyes darting around like she was looking for an escape hatch that wasn't there. This doesn't change anything, she'd said, but the tremble in her voice told a different story. She was losing her grip, and I could feel it. Trent stood behind her, his arms crossed tight, looking like a guy who just realized he'd bet on the wrong horse. Ava clung to Camilla's leg, her small face scrunched up, probably picking up on the tension in the room. Julian stayed quiet next to me, his hands resting on his knees, but I knew he was watching everything, soaking it in. I'd kept my silence for years, letting her lies pile up, but now it was my turn to push back. That's fine, Camilla said, forcing her voice to steady. We'll go to court. You still owe me alimony for wasting my youth. She tossed her hair back, trying to claw back some of that confidence she'd walked in with. Wasting her youth? I almost laughed, but it stuck in my throat, turning into a bitter taste instead. She thought she could flip this around, make me the bad guy for staying home while she chased her dreams. I set the phone down on the coffee table, slow and deliberate, letting her words hang there. Your youth, I said, keeping my tone even. I raised Julian while you were gone. I kept this house together. I paid the bills when your big career didn't cover them. You don't get to call that wasting anything. Her eyes flashed, annoyed that I wasn't crumbling like she'd expected. You had it easy, she snapped. Sitting here, playing house, while I worked my ass off. You owe me for that. Easy? I thought about the nights Julian cried himself to sleep because she didn't call, the times I stretched a paycheck to cover the heat because her trips ate up the budget. I thought about the years I put my own life on hold so she could climb her ladder, believing it was for us. I didn't say any of that, not yet. I just looked at her, letting her stew in her own nonsense. She didn't know I'd been keeping track, not out of spite, but because I had to. I'd saved every receipt, every bank statement, every text where she promised she'd be home soon. I wasn't planning revenge back then. I was just surviving. Now, though, it was all coming in handy. I reached under the couch, where I'd stashed a file folder earlier that week. I'd been digging through old papers, trying to make sense of our finances, when I found more than I'd bargained for. I pulled it out now, a plain manila thing, worn at the edges, and set it next to the divorce papers. Camilla's eyes flicked to it, suspicious. "What's that?" she asked, her voice sharp. I didn't answer right away. I just opened it, slow and careful, and pulled out a stack of photos and emails I printed. "This," I said, sliding the first photo across the table, "is you and Trent. For years ago. At that conference in Chicago." Her face went pale, the color draining out like water from a cracked glass. The photo showed them at a hotel bar, her laughing, him leaning in too close. It wasn't much on its own, but there were more: receipts from dinners, plane tickets, a whole trail she'd left behind. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice rising. Trent stepped forward, his jaw tight, but he didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I could see the panic in his eyes. "Doesn't matter," I said, calm as I could manage. "What matters is it's been going on a lot longer than you're pretending. For years, Camilla. We were still married. Still a family." I slid another paper over, an email from Trent, dated 3 years back, talking about their future. She grabbed it, her hand shaking, scanning the words like she could make them disappear. "This is nothing," she said, but it sounded weak, desperate. "You can't prove anything." I shrugged, leaning back again. "Maybe not in court. Not yet. But I've got enough to make it messy. And I will, if you push me." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the right comeback. For years, she'd counted on my silence, my patience. I didn't fight when she pulled away, didn't yell when she stopped coming home. I let her lie because I didn't want to break what was left of us, for Julian's sake, for mine. But now she was trying to take everything, to erase us like we'd never mattered. That's where she crossed the line. "You think you're so smart," she muttered, tossing the email back on the table. "What's your plan? Huh? Drag this out? Bleed me dry?" I shook my head. "I didn't want this, Camilla. You did. You're the one who brought him here, brought her." I nodded at Ava, who flinched a little at the attention. "You made this mess. I'm just cleaning it up." Trent finally spoke, his voice low, edgy. "You're bluffing. You've got nothing real." I turned to him, meeting his stare. "You sure about that? You think I've been sitting here twiddling my thumbs while you two played house?" He didn't answer, just looked away, his confidence slipping. Camilla tried to rally, crossing her arms again. "Fine. Keep your stupid house. I'll still get what's mine." She was grasping now, clutching at anything to save face. I didn't argue. I just watched her, letting her lies crash against my silence. She'd underestimated me for years, thought I was too soft, too weak to fight back. She didn't know I'd been building a shield all this time, piece by piece, waiting for the day she'd force my hand. Julian shifted beside me, his elbow brushing mine. I glanced at him, and he gave me that same small nod he'd given before, like he was saying, "Keep going." He'd seen it too, her lies, her games. He'd been quiet, but he wasn't blind. I turned back to Camilla, my voice steady. "You want to fight dirty? Go ahead. But I've got more than you think." She glared at me, her plan unraveling, and I could see the doubt creeping in. She'd thought she could bury me with her betrayal. Instead, my silence, my years of watching, waiting, was about to bury her. I sat there, the file of photos and emails still spread out on the coffee table, watching Camilla try to piece her crumbling plan back together. She'd gone pale when I showed her the proof of her affair, for years of lies laid out in black and white. And now she was scrambling, her eyes flicking between me and Trent like she wasn't sure who to blame. She'd walked in here thinking I was some broke, clueless nobody she could sweep out of her life. But I just turned the tables with the house deed and the evidence of her cheating. She muttered something under her breath, too low for me to catch, then straightened up, forcing that fake confidence back into her voice. "I can't believe this," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. You've just been sitting here writing blogs and burning toast." She waved a hand at me, like I was some sad joke she'd outgrown. That's when Julian finally broke his silence, and everything changed. He stood up from the couch, slow and deliberate, his sneakers scuffing the floor as he moved. "Mom, you really don't know?" he said, his voice steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. I turned to him, my heart thumping, wondering what he was up to. He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on Camilla, calm and sure. He walked over to the coffee table, reached past the divorce papers in my file, and picked up a hardcover book I'd left there a few days ago. It was thick, with a dark blue cover and gold lettering, The Silent Watcher. He held it out to her, his expression unreadable. He wrote this, Julian said, nodding at me. He's M.J. Clark. Camilla's jaw dropped, her eyes widening as she stared at the book like it was a bomb about to go off. Trent frowned, confused, but she knew exactly what it meant. That book had been everywhere, bookstores, billboards, even a TV ad last month saying it was getting a streaming deal. And she had no idea it was mine. I felt my stomach flip, a mix of pride and nerves hitting me all at once. I'd never told her about it, not the writing, not the pen name, not the success. For years, I'd been scribbling stories while Julian slept, tapping away on my laptop after fixing dinner or patching the house. It started as a way to keep my mind busy when Camilla was gone, a quiet escape from the loneliness creeping in. I didn't think much of it at first, just words to fill the empty nights. But then I sent one to a publisher under a fake name, M.J. Clark, because I didn't want anyone tying it back to me. It sold. Then it exploded. The royalties started rolling in, more money than I'd ever seen, all tucked away in a separate account she never knew about. I didn't flaunt it, didn't buy fancy cars or brag to friends. I kept it quiet, used it to pay off the house, save for Julian's future. Camilla thought I was some deadbeat because I didn't punch a clock. She didn't know I'd been out-earning her for years. She snatched the book from Julian's hand, her fingers trembling as she flipped it open, scanning the title page like she could prove it was a lie. This can't be you, she stammered, her voice shaky. You're not. She didn't finish, just kept staring at the words, her whole world tilting. I leaned back on the couch, crossing my arms, letting her process it. It's me, I said, simple and straight. Been me for a while now. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking on mine, and I saw something new there, panic, maybe even fear. She built this story in her head where I was nothing, a loser she could ditch without a second thought. Now she was holding proof she'd been wrong, and it was hitting her hard. Trent stepped closer, peering over her shoulder at the book. What's the big deal? He asked, his voice edgy, like he didn't get why she was freaking out. Camilla turned to him, her face tight. This is a bestseller, she said, almost whispering. It's worth millions. And he wrote it. Trent's eyes widened, his smug grin gone, replaced by something greedy and nervous. He looked at me like I'd just turned into a different person, and I guess in a way, I had. To them, I'd been the quiet guy in the background, the one they could ignore. Now I was the guy with a secret they couldn't touch, and it was driving them crazy. How? Camilla demanded, turning back to me, the book still clutched in her hands. When did you even? She couldn't finish the question, too rattled to make sense of it. I shrugged, keeping my voice calm. While you were gone. Nights, mostly. Had a lot of time to think. That stung her. I saw it in the way her mouth twitched. She hated being reminded of how much she'd left behind, how many hours I'd spent alone while she was off with Trent. Julian sat back down next to me, his expression steady, but I caught the faintest smirk on his face. He'd known about the book for months, found it on my desk one day, and put it together. He didn't tell anyone, just kept my secret, proud in his own quiet way. Camilla flipped through the pages, her hands shaking, then stopped, looking at me again. You hid this from me, she said, her voice low, accusing. All this time, you were, what? Laughing at me? I shook my head. I wasn't hiding it to hurt you. I just didn't need you to know. That was the truth. I didn't write it for her, didn't do any of it for her. It was mine, something she couldn't take away. She stared at me, the book slipping a little in her grip, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She thought she had me pegged, thought she could walk all over me. Now she was holding proof she'd misjudged everything, and it was tearing her apart. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You didn't see him, Mum, he said, his voice quiet but firm. You never did. That hit her like a slap. She flinched, her eyes darting to him, then back to me. For the first time since she walked in, she didn't have a comeback. Trent shifted, looking uncomfortable, like he wanted to bolt. Ava stayed silent, watching it all unfold. The room felt heavy, the air thick with everything she'd missed. That book wasn't just words on a page, it was the life I'd built without her, the strength she didn't know I had. And it changed everything. I watched Camilla clutch that book, The Silent Watcher, like it was the last piece of her plan she could hold on to. Her face was a mess of shock and anger, her fingers digging into the cover as she tried to wrap her head around the fact that I wasn't the nobody she'd thought I was. Julian's words, "You never saw him," Mum, still hung in the air, heavy and true, and I could see them cutting into her. She'd walked in here with Trent and Ava, thinking she'd blindsided me, thinking she could kick me out of my own life with a few signatures. But I just dropped 2 bombs, the house was mine, and I was MJ Clark, the guy behind $1 million book. Now she was blinking fast, stammering, trying to find a way to claw back control. "The royalties," she said suddenly, her voice sharp, desperate. "Those are marital assets, right? I'm entitled to half." She was grasping, reaching for anything to turn this around. I just smiled, slow and easy, because she didn't know the best part yet. Trent perked up at that, his greedy eyes lighting up like he'd just heard a cash register ding. "Yeah," he said, stepping closer, his voice eager. "That's how it works, isn't it? You can't keep all that money to yourself." He looked at me like I was some vault he could crack open, like he'd already started spinning my royalties in his head. Camilla nodded, latching onto his words, her confidence flickering back. "We were married when you wrote it," she said, pointing at the book. "That means it's ours, mine too." She thought she'd found her lifeline, a way to salvage her big exit. I let her talk, let her build up that hope, because watching it crash was going to be sweeter than anything I could say. Julian shifted beside me, his elbow brushing mine, and I knew he was waiting for it too. He'd seen the papers. I'd told him bits and pieces, but he didn't know the whole play yet. I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees, keeping my voice calm. "No, Camilla," I said, meeting her eyes. "The divorce was finalized 2 weeks ago. You signed without reading the fine print again." Her mouth dropped open, the book slipping from her hands and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Trent froze, his face going slack. Ava looked up, confused, but stayed quiet, clinging to Camilla's leg. I reached for the divorce papers she'd slapped on the table when she walked in, flipping through them to the last page. There it was, her signature, scrawled in her usual rushed cursive, dated 2 weeks back when I'd sent them through her lawyer. She'd been so eager to get rid of me, so sure she was winning, that she didn't even glance at what she was signing. "You agreed to everything," I said, tapping the page. "No alimony, no assets, no claims. It's done." She lunged for the papers, snatching them from my hands, her eyes scanning the lines like she could undo it with sheer willpower. This can't be right," she stammered, her voice shaking. I wouldn't," she stopped, her finger hovering over her signature, the proof she couldn't deny. "I'd hired a lawyer months ago, kept it quiet, started the process when I found out about Trent and Ava. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted out, clean and simple. The lawyer drafted it tight, made sure my royalties and the house stayed mine, and buried it in legalese she'd never bothered to read. She'd signed it in a hurry, probably thinking she'd deal with the details later, after she'd kicked me out. She didn't know I'd already filed it, didn't know the judge had stamped it final. She'd played herself, and now she was realizing it. Trent's face went red, his hands balling into fists. "You tricked her," he snapped, stepping toward me like he wanted to start something. I didn't flinch, just looked at him, steady and calm. "No," I said. "She tricked herself. Should have read what she was signing." He glared at me, but he didn't move closer. He knew he was out of his depth now, caught in a mess he hadn't planned for. Camilla dropped the papers back on the table, her hands trembling, her eyes wild. "You can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll fight it. I'll get a lawyer, take you to court." I cut her off, shaking my head. "It's over, Camilla. Court's done. You've got nothing to fight with." She stared at me, her breath coming fast, like she was drowning in her own mistake. For years, she'd underestimated me, thought I was some soft, quiet guy she could walk over. She didn't know I'd learned to play the long game, to watch and wait while she dug her own hole. Julian finally spoke up, leaning back on the couch with a small, satisfied smile. "You thought Dad was clueless," he said, his voice low, almost amused. "He's been playing chess while you were playing checkers." That hit her hard. I saw it in the way her shoulders slumped, the way her eyes flicked to him, then away. She'd lost him too, and she knew it. He wasn't her little boy anymore. He was my son, through and through. I stood up, stretching a little, feeling the weight of the night start to lift off me. "You want it out," I said, looking at her. "You've got it. Take Trent, take Ava, take whatever you've built. Just don't expect me to pay for it." She didn't answer, couldn't. Maybe. Trent grabbed her arm, muttering something about figuring this out, but his voice was shaky, his bravado gone. Ava tugged on Camilla's hand, whispering, "Are we leaving?" Camilla nodded, dazed, like she was moving on autopilot. They'd come in here so sure they'd won, so ready to rewrite my life. Now they were walking out with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a divorce they didn't even understand. I watched them head for the door, Camilla's step slow, Trent's shoulders hunched. Julian stayed on the couch, his smile fading into something quieter, more real. "You okay, Dad?" he asked, looking up at me. I nodded, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Yeah," I said. "We're good." The door clicked shut behind them, and the house went still, just me and Julian and the life we'd keep building. Camilla thought she'd ended me, but she just set me free. The divorce was final, and for once, I was the one holding all the pieces. I stood there in the living room, the echo of the front door clicking shut still ringing in my ears as Camilla, Trent, and Ava disappeared into the night. The house felt quieter now, emptier in a way that wasn't bad, just different. Julian sat on the couch, his legs stretched out, looking at me with those steady eyes of his, waiting for me to say something. The divorce papers, the book, my file of evidence, it was all still scattered on the coffee table, a messy pile of proof that we just won a fight I hadn't even wanted to start. Camilla had come in here with her big plan, thinking she could take everything, the house, the money, our whole life, and leave me with nothing. But I'd turned it around, kept what was mine, and now she was gone, stuck with the mess she'd made. I took a deep breath, letting it out slow, and looked at Julian. "You hungry?" I asked, because after all that, I needed something normal to hold on to. He grinned, just a little, and nodded. "Yeah, Dad. Pizza." I smiled back. "Pizza it is." We ordered from the place down the street, the one we'd been going to since he was a kid, and while we waited, I started picking up the papers. Camilla's signature stared up at me from the divorce decree, final and binding, a mark of her own undoing. She tried to play me, tried to plead and blame and negotiate her way back into control after I dropped the truth about the house and the book. First, she'd begged. "We can work this out," she'd said, her voice soft, fake sweet, like she hadn't just tried to kick me out. When that didn't work, she'd turn nasty, spitting out, "You're selfish, keeping all this from me." I didn't bite. I just stood there, calm as I could, and let her rant. Finally, she tried to bargain, offering to split things fair if I gave her a cut of the royalties. I shut that down fast. "You wanted freedom," I told her, my voice firm. "You've got it. Live with your choices." She didn't like that, her face twisted up, angry and helpless, but she couldn't argue. She'd signed her way out, and I wasn't giving her a dime more than I had to. The pizza came, and Julian and I sat at the kitchen table, eating straight from the box like we used to when he was little. He didn't say much at first, just chewed and watched me, like he was making sure I was okay. I was, mostly. It hurt, seeing Camilla walk away with Trent and Ava, knowing she'd picked them over us years ago, and I'd been too blind to see it. But it also felt right, like a weight lifting off my chest. She'd made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. "She's gonna try something," Julian said between bites, wiping sauce off his chin. "You know she won't let this go easy." I nodded, because he was right. Camilla didn't give up. She'd fight dirty if she could. "Let her try," I said. "She's got nothing left to stand on." He smirked, a little proud, a little relieved, and we kept eating, the quiet settling around us like a blanket. I wasn't done with her yet, though, not completely. She walked away thinking she could still call the shots, but I had one more move. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to my lawyer's number, and sent a quick text. File for child support. Julian was 16, still a minor, and Camilla had a good job, better than good, with all those years of climbing the ladder. She'd barely paid a cent for him while I stayed home, covering everything. Now it was her turn. I kept it simple, just enough to reflect the effort she'd never put in. Nothing crazy. She'd hate it, but she'd pay, because I'd make sure she had no choice. When she called the next day, screeching about it, I stayed cool. "You owe him," I said. "Years of nothing. This is fair." She tried to argue, claiming she couldn't afford it with Trent and Ava to take care of. That's when I brought up the adultery compensation clause, another little gem buried in the divorce papers she'd signed blind. "Pay it," I told her, "or I'll see you in court." She went quiet, then hung up. A week later, the first check came. She paid. She had to. I didn't want to crush her, not really. I just wanted what was right for Julie and for us. She'd chosen Trent and Ava, chosen her shiny new life over the one we'd built. Fine. But she didn't get to walk away clean, leaving us to pick up the pieces. I thought about Ava sometimes, that little girl caught in the middle. She wasn't mine, but she was innocent, and I hoped Camilla wouldn't drag her through too much mud. Trent, though, I didn't care about him. He'd hitched himself to her wagon, thinking it was a free ride. Now he was stuck, and I had a feeling he'd regret it soon enough. Julian finished his slice and leaned back, looking at me. "You think she'll be okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I knew he meant Camilla. I shrugged. "She's tough. She'll figure it out. But it's not our problem anymore." He nodded, accepting that, and we cleaned up the pizza box, moving on like it was any other night. I didn't feel victorious, not exactly. It was more like relief, like I'd finally closed a door that had been hanging open too long. Camilla had chosen this path years ago, when she started lying, when she built a family behind my back. I'd given her everything, my time, my trust, my silence, and she'd thrown it away. Now she was out there, scrambling to make it work with Trent, while I was here, keeping things steady for Julian. That's what mattered. The house was ours, the money was mine, and our life was ours to shape. She tried to take it all, but I'd held on, and now she had to live with the fallout. "You chose this," I told her, and I meant it. She did, and I was done feeling sorry about it. I woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, hitting the counter just right, making the old wood glow a little. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years, not since Camilla started drifting away, leaving me and Julian to fill the empty spaces she left behind. Last night had been a storm, with her storming in with Trent and Ava, trying to rip everything apart, only to walk out with nothing but her own mistakes. Now it was just us, me and Julian, and the air felt cleaner, like we'd finally shaken off something heavy. I started the coffee maker, the familiar gurgle filling the silence, and thought about what came next. She was gone, the divorce was final, and we had a chance to start over. Not from scratch, but from something real, something ours. Julian shuffled in a little while later, his hair a mess, still in his pajamas. He grabbed a mug and poured himself some coffee, even though I'd told him a million times he was too young for it. "Morning," he mumbled, sitting at the table across from me. I nodded back, taking a sip of my own. "Morning. Sleep okay?" He shrugged, the way he always did when he didn't want to talk too much, but then he said, "Yeah, better than I thought." I got that. After all the yelling, the revelations, the house, the book, the divorce being done, it was like we'd both been holding our breath, waiting for the dust to settle. Now it had, and we could breathe again. I looked at him, my kid who'd grown up too fast, and felt a pang of pride. He'd stood by me last night, quiet but strong, and I knew we'd be okay. Camilla and Trent were out there somewhere, probably licking their wounds. I'd heard from a mutual friend a few days later. They'd moved to some city a couple hours away, renting a cramped apartment because they couldn't afford much else. Trent lost his job not long after, something about his boss finding out he'd been messing around with a married woman, Camilla, and it didn't sit right with the company. I didn't feel bad for him. He'd walked into this with his eyes open, thinking he'd hit the jackpot with her. Now they were scrambling, borrowing money to cover the settlement and legal fees I'd forced her to pay. The child support checks started coming too, small but steady, and I put every cent into a savings account for Julian. She hated sending them. I could feel it in the stiff way she wrote his name on the envelopes, but she didn't have a choice. Her perfect little family fantasy was cracking, and I wasn't surprised. It was built on lies, and those don't hold up long. Me and Julian, though, we were moving forward. He'd been talking about college for a while, tossing around ideas about where he wanted to go, what he wanted to study. Maybe writing, he said one night over dinner, a few weeks after Camilla left. Like you. That hit me hard, in a good way. I'd never pushed him toward it, never even told him much about my own work until he found that book. But he'd been reading my stuff, M.J. Clark's stuff, on the sly, and he liked it. "You're good at it," I told him, keeping it simple. "If that's what you want, go for it." He nodded, a small smile tugging at his mouth, and I could see him starting to figure himself out. He was applying to schools now, filling out forms late into the night, and I'd sit with him sometimes, helping with essays or just keeping him company. It felt right, like we were building something together. I kept writing too, under my pen name, staying out of the spotlight like always. The Silent Watcher was still doing well, the streaming deal was signed, and checks kept coming, but I didn't let it change us. We stayed in the house, fixed it up a little with the extra cash, but nothing flashy. I liked the quiet, the routine, coffee in the morning, writing in the afternoon, dinners with Julian where we'd talk about his day or just sit in comfortable silence. Some nights, he'd show me bits of his own stories, rough drafts he'd scribbled in notebooks, and I'd read them, amazed at how sharp he was, how much he saw. "You've got a knack," I'd say, and he'd shrug, but I could tell he was proud. We were finding our rhythm, a life that didn't need Camilla or her chaos to feel whole. I thought about her sometimes, wondered how she was holding up. She'd chosen Trent and Ava, walked away from us like we were nothing, and now she was paying for it, literally and figuratively. I didn't hate her, not anymore. I just didn't care. She'd made her move, and I'd made mine, and we were both living with the results. Julian didn't talk about her much, but I caught him staring at his phone once, like he was thinking about texting her. "You can, I said, keeping my voice light. "If you want to." He shook his head, putting the phone down. "Nah, she doesn't get it. We're good here." That was enough for me. He didn't need her approval, didn't need her to see him. He had me, and I had him, and that was more than she'd ever given us. The days turned into weeks, then months, and the house started feeling like ours again, not hers, not theirs, just ours. I'd walk past the living room where she'd stood with those divorce papers, and it didn't sting anymore. It was just a room, a place where we'd faced her down and come out stronger. Julian kept writing, kept applying, and one day he got a letter, an acceptance to a school he'd been eyeing, with a scholarship for his essays. "Dad, look," he said, holding it up, his grin wide. I hugged him, hard, feeling like we'd hit a milestone we'd earned together. We were starting again, not because we had to, but because we wanted to for him, for me, for all of us who mattered. And it felt damn good. I was sitting at my desk one morning, the house quiet except for the hum of the coffee maker in the kitchen, when the phone rang. It was Camilla. Her name flashed on the screen, and for a second, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the button. Months had passed since she'd walked out with Trent and Ava, since I'd turned her plan upside down with the house deed, the book, and the divorce she'd signed without reading. We'd had no contact since the child support check started. Stiff little payments she sent like clockwork, probably gritting her teeth every time she wrote Julian's name. I didn't expect her to call, not now, not after everything. I picked up, curious more than anything, and her voice came through, softer than I remembered. "Hey," she said, like we were old friends catching up. "Ava's starting school soon. I was wondering if you had any advice. You were always good with that stuff." I didn't say anything at first, just let the words sit there, heavy and strange. Advice? After she'd tried to erase me, to take everything and leave me with nothing? I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the backyard where Julian used to kick a soccer ball around. Part of me wanted to hang up, to tell her she'd lost the right to ask me for anything. But I didn't. I just sat there, silent, letting her squirm on the other end. "Look," she said after a pause, her voice tighter now. "I know things ended bad. I just thought, for Ava. For Ava. Not for Julian, not for us, just for the kid she'd chosen over her own son." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my tone flat. "Figure it out, Camilla," I said. "You've got Trent. You don't need me." She started to say something else, but I ended the call, setting the phone down with a soft click. That was it, done. I wasn't her crutch anymore. Julian came home later that day, tossing his backpack by the door like always. He'd been at school, finishing up his last year, and he'd grown into this quiet confidence I couldn't get enough of. "Mom called," I told him, keeping it casual as I stirred a pot of pasta on the stove. He raised an eyebrow, leaning against the counter. "Yeah? What did she want?" I shrugged. "Parenting advice. For Ava." He snorted, a short, sharp sound, and shook his head. "She's got nerve." I nodded, stirring the sauce. "Thought you might want to know." He didn't say much after that, just grabbed a soda from the fridge and sat at the table, but I could tell he was thinking about it. Camilla was a ghost now, popping up just enough to remind us she existed, but not enough to matter. A few days later, Julian came to me with an idea. "I want to send her something," he said, holding up a copy of my newest book, The Final Deduction. It had just come out under my pen name, M.J. Clark, and it was already climbing the charts, another quiet when I didn't flaunt. I looked at the cover, dark red with silver letters, and raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" He nodded, a small smirk tugging at his mouth. "Yeah, she needs to see it." I didn't argue, knew he had his reasons. He flipped it open, showed me the dedication I'd written months ago, to those who think silence is weakness. It never is. It was for him, for me, for everyone who'd ever been underestimated. He grabbed a pen, signed his name under mine from Julian, and mailed it off. I didn't ask what he was hoping for. Maybe closure, maybe a jab. Either way, it was his call. Camilla never called back after that. I figured she got the book, read the dedication, and realized we were done playing her games. She'd faded out of our lives, living her mess with Trent somewhere far off, while we kept moving forward. Julian graduated a few months later, walking across the stage in his cap and gown, grinning wide as I cheered from the stands. He'd gotten into that college he wanted, the one with the scholarship, and he was set to study writing, following my footsteps, but making his own path. I was proud, prouder than I could say, watching him shake the principal's hand, knowing we'd built this together. The crowd clapped, the sun shone, and for a minute, it felt like everything lined up just right. I kept writing too, churning out stories under my alias, staying out of the spotlight like always. The final deduction was a hit. People loved the twisty plot, the quiet hero who outsmarted everyone. I put a piece of us in there, a cheeky teen protagonist who saw too much, and a sharp-witted dad who played the long game. It wasn't our story, not exactly, but it was close enough. The checks kept coming, and I socked most of it away for Julian's tuition, for the house, for whatever came next. We didn't need much, just each other, this place, and the freedom to be ourselves. Some nights, we'd sit on the porch, him with a notebook, me with a beer, and we'd talk about his ideas or just listen to the crickets. It was simple, real, ours. Looking back, I could see it all, Camilla's betrayal, the fight, the way we came out stronger. She thought she could break us, thought my silence meant I was weak. She was wrong. It had been my strength, my way of holding on until the right moment. Now she was gone, and we were here, living a life she'd never understand. Julian was off to college soon, and I'd keep writing, keep building. The best stories, I learned, were the ones built on truth, the kind we'd lived through, the kind we'd earned. The final deduction was doing well, of course it was. It had to. It was us, in every word, and that was more than Camilla could ever take away.